Today, we'll cover the series Avatar The Last Airbender from start to end in detail.
Water, earth, fire, air.
Amidst the chaos of war, a young boy vanishes, leaving the world in disarray and despair. But what if I told you he wasn't truly gone? In fact, Aang was just taking a massive break from the world by freezing himself in a glacier. Yep, literally. You see, Aang was born among the airbenders, and when he was just a tiny little kid, he stumbled upon a pile of toys. The monks at the Southern Air Temple were totally surprised when Aang picked out the Avatar relics from the toys, accidentally revealing that he was the next Avatar to be. For now, the monks of the Southern Air Temple decided to keep the big news to themselves. For a brief period, Aang experienced the joys of a carefree childhood. As an adventurous air nomad, he traversed the globe, discovering new and exciting locations, while his main sanctuary remained the Southern Air Temple. Providing unwavering care and guidance was the beloved monk Gyatso, who played the role of a nurturing guardian, wise mentor, and a fatherly figure, imparting essential knowledge and skills to young Aang. Nevertheless, Aang was one talented kid, a real bending whiz. Even at just 6 years old, he could airbend circles around kids twice his age. And by the time he hit 10, he was already better than his own teachers and even earned the airbending arrow tattoos and the title of an airbending master at just 12. Now that made him the youngest master in air nomad history, a total prodigy. But things weren't all rainbows and sunshine, because once the sign of an oncoming war started showing, the monks decided to break the big news, and at 12, Aang found out he was the Avatar, which is usually revealed when kids are 16.
The only mistake they made was telling you before you turned 16.
That's a huge responsibility for someone so young. And to make it worse, his pals started acting distant, leaving him feeling all alone. Poor Aang found comfort in practicing airbending with the monks, especially his buddy Monk Gyatso. Gyatso was once friends with Avatar Roku as well and knew just what to do to cheer Aang up. He understood the ups and downs of growing up as the Avatar and made sure to add a sprinkle of joy to Aang's life, making things a little brighter for the little guy. But how long could Gyatso shelter him? Finally, the fateful day came when the monks of the Southern Air Temple decided to send Aang off to the Eastern Air Temple for his Avatar training, and when little Aang learned of that, he couldn't bear the thought of being separated from Gyatso. Feeling scared and unsure, Aang decided to escape with his flying bison, Appa, only to get caught in a wild storm where, in a moment of desperation, he entered the Avatar state, tapping into his past lives as Avatar and using a mix of air and water bending to freeze himself in a massive ball of glacier. This amazing Avatar state somehow kept him alive for nearly a century while the 100-Year War continued to rage on. That was until he was found. Two siblings from the Southern Water Tribe, Katara and Sokka, stumbled upon the little guy literally frozen in a massive glacier. They were out fishing in a small canoe when suddenly the currents picked up, getting them stuck between 3 ice floes and stranded in the middle of the sea. That didn't exactly help them calm down, and like all siblings, the two started fighting. Katara lost her temper, and that's when she accidentally waterbended and broke a big iceberg, which fell into the ocean. They were pushed back on their ice float just as another iceberg with 2 mysterious forms emerged, glowing blue. It was none other but the frozen Avatar that had disappeared years ago. Seeing that there were 2 forms inside, Katara stepped forward and broke the iceberg. The thing gushed out a gust of air and a bright emitting light before revealing Aang and Appa. I wish they were the only one who witnessed this, but no. Some distance away, a Fire Nation ship loomed around, and on it was the banished crown prince of the Fire Nation, Zuko, with his uncle Iroh. His only motive? To capture the Avatar. So the minute he saw the flash of light, he knew it was the Avatar and started investigating. Meanwhile, an unconscious Aang had fallen into Katara's arms, and the 2 siblings were clearly surprised seeing the dude's arrow tattoos. These tattoos were the telltale sign of a master airbender, and they had been wiped off the face of the earth for far too long. Nevertheless, they brought him back to their village where Aang quickly became a cheery presence and grew close to Katara. Later, while the two were out exploring, they came across an abandoned Fire Nation ship. That is when Katara tells Aang that he had been in the ice ball for far too long. So long that the guy totally missed the war that had been waging for 100 years now. Fire Lord Sozin started the war with the goal of turning the Fire Nation into a global empire. The guy totally exploited the Avatar's absence and using the Fire Nation's economic, technological, and military power, inflicted devastating destruction and loss of life on the other nations with the war. When Aang heard the news, it really crushed him, but just as Katara got his spirits up, the two suddenly got trapped inside the ship. Luckily, the duo managed to escape, but not before Zuko had spotted them. He has now confirmed that he's found the missing Avatar. Nevertheless, Aang was back and ready to explore the world. And he wasn't going solo. He had his own awesome squad just like every Avatar before him. Welcome to Team Avatar. And of course, his very first pals were none other than Katara and Sokka themselves. Now, Katara from a young age knew the harsh reality of her tribe. The fact that it was not just getting weaker, but its benders literally erased. Since she was born, the Fire Nation had attacked her tribe many times, trying to catch and lock up their waterbenders. As a result, there were literally no waterbenders left, and she was the last one in her tribe. Because of the reality she grew up in, Katara was mature, compassionate, and often fiercely motherly in nature. Many times when Aang and his friends would be traveling, they would come across pretty rash nemesis. Yet Katara would even show mercy and compassion to them. Like Zuko, literally one of the original enemies, but even to him, Katara once showed mercy by offering to heal the scar on his face. However, after her mother passed away during a Fire Nation attack, their father went to fight in the 100-Year War and little Katara and Sokka were left to be raised by their grandmother, Kanna. Sokka, on the other hand, is quite a clumsy dude. A constant entertainment and kinda like an unintentional class clown to the Team Avatar. But honestly, deep down, he isn't really a coward he's portrayed as. Sokka had a deep desire to join his father in the war but was left behind. Since there were no other teenage boys in the tribe, Sokka became the eldest, most pivotal man in the southern tribe, making him the tribe's leader. He took on the responsibility of training children to become future warriors, even though he felt uncertain about it, and honestly, he did a pretty good job, given how Katara turned out to be. Plus, as a non-bender, he felt overshadowed by his friends' bending abilities. But it was Sokka who regularly came up with plans, gathered important information, maps, and helped his group defeat the Fire Nation. He was confident and fierce when it came to planning and often took on the role of the navigator for the team. Now you must be wondering why Zuko's after Aang, since he obsessively follows the Avatar everywhere he goes. Well, you see, Zuko has a deep trauma that gave him some serious daddy issues. Zuko was the son of the Fire Lord Ozai, the current Fire Lord that's waging the war. But despite the fact that the guy's literally the crown prince of the Fire Nation, once his mother passed away, he felt largely ghosted by his father and his sister Azula. Azula and Ozai were very much alike, and Zuko was totally ridiculed and insulted by them at all times. Unlike them, Zuko had a bit of heart in him. So when he was 13 years old, Zuko took part in a war council. At the meeting, one of the generals suggested sacrificing a whole Fire Nation's fleet just to achieve a measly goal, and hearing this, Zuko totally lashed out in anger. Only the guy had no idea that the brain behind the suggestion in the first place was his own father, Ozai. Ozai, being all hot-headed, couldn't bear that his own son spoke against him and demanded Zuko to take part in Agni Kai, a traditional duel for honor where the winner burns the loser. Zuko thought he'd be facing the general, but surprise, it was his own dad. He begged for forgiveness, but unfortunately, his plea fell on deaf ears, and Ozai mercilessly burned him, giving Zuko his mark of identity, a scarred face. Not just that, but he even banished him from the Fire Nation. Now, his only chance to regain his honor and return home was to capture the Avatar, Aang. He was given a measly little ship of his own and accompanied by his uncle Iroh, who had also lost his only child to Ozai's irrational decisions. With that, Zuko sailed off to find the missing Avatar. He desperately wanted to be accepted back and believed that by capturing Aang, he would be able to restore his place in his father's eyes. So once Aang awakened, it was a cat and mouse game for the two of them. Nevertheless, the first place Aang made his journey to is none other but his home, the same one that he had run away from, burdened with the reality of being an avatar, and froze himself in time. Only the little guy didn't know that they were gone. Every single one of the airbenders were gone and wiped by the Fire Nation to eradicate all possibilities of the Avatar surviving and becoming an obstacle to their war. Aang was the last of them. Naturally, he was excited and on the day of the trip was prancing around at the thought of finally reuniting with his people. But Katara and Sokka knew that that smile would wipe off too soon once he realizes the truth. Katara tried to calm down Aang's excitement. She wanted him to think about the possibility that the Fire Nation might have attacked his people. But Aang wasn't having any of it. He was sure that his fellow air nomads wouldn't have been taken down that easily. In his mind, getting to an air temple without a flying bison was totally impossible. And since the Fire Nation didn't have that kind of help, Aang believed they couldn't have reached the temple. Once they reached the temple, Aang excitedly started showing them around. As expected, it was all deserted, so Aang went straight to the air sanctuary hoping to find someone inside. It was filled with hundreds of statues, all arranged perfectly. These were the statues of all the avatars to have ever been born. Just then, the group heard a humming which turned out to be just a lemur. They eventually adopted that lemur and named it Momo. But in that moment, Aang chased the lemur, leading him to a torn and damaged tent. And as he peeked inside, he was horrified to discover the lifeless bodies, skeletons of several Fire Nation soldiers scattered in the snow. It wasn't long before he came across the remains of Monk Gyatso, his very master and father figure that had raised him. That was it, and Aang became overwhelmed with grief, collapsing to his knees and shedding tears at the sight of his beloved mentor's skeleton. And it was not long before his avatar state got triggered. His eyes and tattoos started glowing, and not just his but every statue inside the air sanctuary. Even the ones in other temples across the four nations, including the Crescent Island Fire Temple of deceased Avatar Roku, which notified the Fire Sages. And that's how the news soon reaches the Fire Lord Ozai of the Avatar's return. However, now that Aang knew his reality, he desperately needed a direction to get out of the war party he just woke up to. He finally learned of his responsibilities when he spoke with his predecessor, Avatar Roku. While traveling around, the group makes it to an Earth Kingdom village. There, Aang came to know about the village being attacked and plundered on a nightly basis by a monstrous spirit called Hei Bai. Of course, seeing that Aang is the Avatar, they asked him for help and the little guy agreed. Only when he goes to reason with the spirit, the thing is in little to no mood to sit down for some peaceful talk. And not just that, but it even kidnaps Sokka off. And just like that, Aang, while chasing after Sokka and the spirit, finds himself in the spirit world. It's there that a massive glowing blue dragon confronts Aang. It was none other than Avatar Roku's dragon, just like Aang has Appa. The dragon shows him the temple on a crescent-shaped island and tells him to go see Avatar Roku there. However, the problem is that the only time Aang can speak to him is during the winter solstice, a natural astronomical event where the sun is farthest from the equator, marking the year's shortest day. During this time, the boundary between the natural and spirit worlds becomes all blurred, and so it's the easiest opportunity for humans to enter the spirit world. And this winter solstice was happening right now, meaning Aang had to get going immediately, so he did. The leader of the village told him to go right away, and when Aang stopped to say thank you to him, he literally shouted at him to just leave. Man needs to calm down. But turns out he was justified because just as Aang and company leaves, he's paid a visit by none other but Zuko. To cut things short, the journey to the temple wasn't an easy one, and Aang had to deal with catapulting fireballs thanks to Zuko and even Zhao, the Fire Nation's naval leader sent by Ozai. Even when he reaches the temple, the 5 fire sages literally attack him, until one of them named Shu helps them to the top. Turns out even the sages had been brainwashed and sided against the Avatar, all except Shu, who remained loyal. Nevertheless, after they somehow managed to open the massive door on the top of the temple, Aang finally gets to speak to Roku. You see, Roku was once a noble from the Fire Nation and grew up with his best friend Sozin. And Sozin was none other than the future heir of the Fire Nation. When Roku discovered he was the Avatar at 16, he had to go through rigorous training while Sozin became the Fire Lord. However, despite their different roles, the two remained buddies as always, and Sozin even went on to be the best man in Roku's wedding. Sweet, right? Only the sweetness doesn't last too long, because over time, Sozin's secret ambitions grew. The ambition to conquer the world and make the Fire Nation the one and only supreme. The minute he revealed this to Roku, he was terrified. Eventually, it caused a rift between them. Decades passed without any conflict until a volcanic eruption threatened Roku's home island. Sozin rushed to his friend's help, but he was too corrupted by now and let Roku die all so he could continue his ambitions. Roku explained to Aang how 100 years ago a comet had appeared, amplifying the Firebender's powers, and Sozin used this opportunity to start the 100-Year War by launching a powerful attack on other nations and causing massive devastation and suffering across the world. Now, his evil dream is continued by Fire Lord Ozai, Zuko's father. And the bad news is that the comet will soon return by the end of summer. And just like his grandfather Sozin, Fire Lord Ozai will use its impact to wreak havoc. Moreover, Aang must put a stop to it. Only it wasn't going to be a piece of cake, and Aang couldn't just blow the firebenders away like a candle. To cut this cake, he must master the art of bending literally all elements, water, earth, and fire before summer's end. It is the only way to save the world. So basically, the guy got some serious summer holiday homework. After all, he skipped a lot when he froze himself, right? Luckily, by this time, Aang already knew the basics of waterbending thanks to Katara. But Katara was not a very advanced bender herself. As the last waterbender of the Southern Water Tribe, she had to teach herself and also needed a master to advance. It wasn't until they reached the Northern Water Tribe that Aang and Katara finally found a master, Pakku. Only the dude wasn't too keen on teaching Katara. However, Katara was a force of talent and eventually convinced Pakku. By this time, the Fire Nation had realized that Aang was taking refuge in the Northern Water Tribe. They pointed all their battleships to wipe out the last cluster of waterbenders, and things were about to get messy because even within them, Zhao and Zuko were determined to win the game of who gets the Avatar first. And so the battle began. While Sokka and Princess Yue of the Northern Water Tribe were out realizing the love blossoming between them, the princess noticed the soot from the oncoming battleships. Even back at the tribe, the gray smoking clouds had warned the waterbenders who now with Aang entered the clash head-on. Meanwhile, Chief Arnook arranged a secret mission by disguising waterbenders as Fire Nation soldiers and boarding its flagship vessel to take out Zhao. He handed the duty to his future son-in-law and Princess Yue's fiancé, Han. Only the dude totally failed, and honestly I'm glad because he was a real prick to Sokka. Nevertheless, after a day of heavy fire, Iroh asked Zhao to cease fire during the night. That's because the waterbenders were the strongest at night since they drew their strength from the moon. Zhao was well aware and started hatching a sinister plan. Back at the tribe, Aang returned all tired and decided to go to the Spirit Oasis. There he entered the spirit world to seek counseling from the moon and ocean spirits. When suddenly Zuko barged in from nowhere, overpowered Katara, and literally ran off with Aang dangling over his shoulder. But he does find it pretty hard to find shelter in the frozen land. Sure enough, Yue, Katara, and Sokka, guided by Aang returning spirit, followed Zuko and managed to get their friend off him, but by the time they returned to the Spirit Oasis, the biggest tragedy was already awaiting them. Zhao had already made his way inside. He grabbed the moon spirit and blasted it to death. With the moon spirit gone, the moon went dark and the waterbenders became helpless. Iroh had had enough of this guy and then and there withdrew his alliance from the Fire Nation and even took out Zhao's men. Seeing all this, Aang went super mad and collided with the ocean spirit that took a monstrous form and wiped out the Fire Nation in just a couple sweeps. However, with the moon spirit gone, the balance would have been permanently disabled. So to restore it, Yue revealed that she always had a connection to the moon spirit and literally sacrificed her life to restore the dead fish. Poor Sokka lost the woman he just fell in love with as she collapsed in her arms. But with the Fire Nation wiped and the spirit restored, it was just Zhao left. And the guy comes to demise once he comes face to face with Zuko. However, before Zuko could even finish him off, the ocean spirit grabbed hold of him, taking out the guy rightfully.
Goodbye, Sokka. I'll always be with you.
Nevertheless, after the battle at the North Pole, Aang, Katara, and Sokka continued their journey with the goal of finding an earthbending master. Only the search became more and more pressing. Desperately, Aang even enrolled in an earthbending school, but it wasn't really much of a help. That's when the students told him of the secret underground earthbending tournament called Earth Rumble 6. Once Aang got there, he saw this macho man totally dominating all the participants. Until a little tiny 12-year-old who was also literally blind absolutely puts the dude to shame. It was none other but the greatest earthbender of all, Toph. And even Aang had already seen her in one of the visions. Only this girl had some serious parental issues. Like, they refused to believe she was gifted and even made sure to never teach her anything advanced. If only they knew she was far better than that already. So when the opportunity came, Toph ran away with Aang as his earthbending master, all to escape her nosy parents.
We can take them. 3 on 3.
Actually, Toph, there's 4 of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't count you. You know, no bending and all.
I can still fight!
Back at the Fire Nation, when the news of the defeat at the North Pole reached Lord Ozai, he totally blamed it on Zuko and Iroh, and guess who was handed over the duty to continue the hippity-hoppity evil game? Zuko's callous sister, Azula. Of course, Dad's favorite. She was the master of manipulation and very well knew that Zuko's biggest wish is to be accepted back into the Fire Nation, so she decided to come to Iroh and Zuko, announcing that they are not banished anymore. Zuko totally trusted his sister and was overjoyed at the possibility of returning home. But Iroh, on the other hand, was skeptical and knew that Ozai had never forgiven anyone. And he was right, because it wasn't long before the two figured that out and they were forced to live as fugitives. Meanwhile, Team Avatar, while exploring a sacred library, learned about the Day of the Black Sun. Sokka immediately said that they can use this info to overpower the Fire Nation that drew strength from the sun. However, unknown to them outside, Appa got literally kidnapped. Aang and his friends went to Ba Sing Se to find their lost Appa and tell the king about a chance to attack the Fire Nation on the Day of Black Sun. They destroyed a Fire Nation drill in a fight and were welcomed into the city as honored guests. But the team felt that something was off. And they were right spot on, because their arrival posed a huge threat to Long Feng, who was the powerful leader of the Dai Li, an evil secret police group in Ba Sing Se. He controlled the city with an iron grip and silenced any opposition, forbidding free speech. To maintain his power, Long Feng captured Appa, knowing how important the bison was to the team. The dude was a callous genius, and even classically blackmailed Team Avatar, threatening Appa's safety. Meanwhile, Zuko and Iroh, who were now fugitives, were running a peaceful tea shop inside the city. It was Zuko who discovered Appa locked up in Dai Li's base. Initially, he thought of stealing him to lure Aang out, but after Iroh found Zuko in a state of inner conflict, he urged him to shape his own destiny and choose his own path. Zuko finally decided to let the bison go. At that moment, Team Avatar and Dai Li found themselves engaged in a fierce clash. Just as the tension peaked, Appa, now liberated and soaring through the skies, swooped in and rescued the entire group. The team then managed to break into the Earth King's place and revealed Long Feng's evil plan, informing him about the war, and finally got the guy arrested and thrown behind bars. But you know what they say. Bad guys don't stay locked up for too long. And it's true, since Princess Azula and her allies Mai and Ty Lee cleverly disguised themselves as Kyoshi warriors and managed to sneak into Ba Sing Se. They freed Long Feng and together with Dai Li managed to put a coup in the city. Azula even captured Katara and Zuko, throwing them both in the prison, and when Iroh and Aang showed up to save the two, Iroh gave Zuko a massive hint to join Team Avatar by saying he should choose the path of good now. But before he could even respond, they are attacked by Azula and the Dai Li. Once again, Azula tempted Zuko with the promises of gaining his father's love and honor if he joins her on this supposed glorious day in Fire Nation's history. Of course, the dude's still not over his daddy issues and sides with her despite Iroh being against it. A fierce battle ensues in the Crystal Catacombs, involving Aang, Katara, Zuko, and Azula. Sadly, Azula struck Aang with lightning, nearly killing him. But Iroh stepped in to protect Aang and Katara, giving them a chance to escape and surrendered himself to Dai Li. He was thrown in prison while Ba Sing Se fell into Azula's hands. Meanwhile, Zuko was given a hero's welcome at the Fire Nation and was finally praised by his father, Fire Lord Ozai. Azula even lies and tells Ozai that Zuko defeated Aang all by himself. Only Zuko wasn't buying any of that and believed that Aang was still alive. He even went to see Iroh in prison only to find out that his uncle refused to even have a single word with him. But it was not long before Zuko received a letter from Iroh revealing their family's history. Iroh shared the story of their ancestors, Sozin and Avatar Roku, and how their conflict lives on within Zuko. It's a battle between good and evil, and now it's up to Zuko to decide. This new information disturbed Zuko greatly, but it did put him in the right direction finally as well. He soon confronts his father, and it is then that he finally let go of his desperate need for validation once he realizes that Ozai is evil after all. With that, Zuko grabs an air balloon and followed the Team Avatar, determined to join them and help them end the war for good. When he finally finds Aang, Team Avatar finds it very hard to believe him, but eventually they accept him, seeing his honesty, and Zuko becomes Aang's firebending teacher.
So let me tell you something right now. You make one step backward, one slip up, give me one reason to think you might hurt Aang, and you won't have to worry about your destiny anymore.
However, just as Zuko's all set to teach Aang some firebending tricks, guess what happens? His own firebending skills decide to take a little break. Luckily, he doesn't stop there and is determined to understand the true nature of firebending. Zuko and Aang go on a journey to the ancient Sun Warriors' temples. There, they meet the last remaining dragons in the world, Ran and Sha, who reveal the secrets of firebending. And as a result, Zuko's powers are restored, and Aang overcomes his fear and dislike of firebending. It's like a fire-powered field trip that turns everything around for Zuko and Aang. Nevertheless, with Aang now mastered in all the bending elements, Team Avatar goes in for the final blow, to stop Ozai once and for all. But while Aang prepared to fight Fire Lord Ozai, he struggled to decide how to win without taking Ozai's life. His friends wanted him to kill the Fire Lord, but Aang believed it was against his belief. And that's when, just before the war, Aang is drawn to a mysterious island that suddenly appears in the sea. On the island, he seeks guidance from his past lives, who, just like his friends, tell him to take Fire Lord Ozai's life as well. Even Roku does so, saying that he thought the same as Aang, and sparing Sozin is exactly what led to the war. But Aang was still not on board with the idea. In the end, the island turns out to be a wise lion turtle, which teaches Aang the forgotten art of energy bending, a fifth element. Meanwhile, Lord Ozai gave his throne to Azula, making her the Fire Lord, and crowned himself as the Phoenix King, the supreme ruler of the world. Dude just created a throne out of thin air just like that. Nevertheless, Zuko, on the other hand, decides to find his uncle, and the two reunite as Zuko finally apologizes. But the surprising thing is that Iroh turns out to be the leader of the Order of the White Lotus, a secret organization focused on beauty and philosophy. They then decide to split up, with Katara and Zuko going for Azula, the White Lotus to liberate Ba Sing Se, and Toph and Sokka to handle the airship fleet. Finally, the fateful day arrives as the Sozin's comet does so too. The Phoenix King Ozai prepares to destroy the Earth Kingdom, only back at the Fire Nation, Azula is beginning to literally lose it. Cherry on top, Zuko and Katara come crashing into her crowning ceremony, making the Mad Princess ask for another duel of Agni Kai between her and Zuko for the crown. Meanwhile, Aang faces off against Ozai, but he still can't bring himself to end the Fire Lord's life. Ozai's attacks overpower him until he accidentally unlocks Aang's chakra, triggering the powerful Avatar state. Taking advantage of his luck, Aang immediately defeats Ozai using energy bending, stripping him of his firebending without causing any harm as he intended to. Not just that, but back at Ba Sing Se, the Order of the White Lotus liberates the city, while Katara manages to defeat Azula and heals Zuko's wounds. With that, Zuko is appointed as the new Fire Lord and declares the war over. The land burst into happy celebrations, finally having a taste of peace after years. But the perfect moment came when Aang and Katara sealed the deal with a romantic kiss on the balcony, hinting at their future married life together. So, this was the entire timeline of Avatar The Last Airbender. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to Cartoonverse and click the bell icon for similar content.